Hello, my name is Hannah Hull. I am group member C of Group 2, following after Joshua Gao and Mary Guerrera. Our topic is the Good Samaritan laws in response to the opioid crisis. As Josh and Mary discussed in the first lectures for our group, this opioid crisis is extremely prevalent. Most overdoses are not a result of recreational use, but rather those overdose victims have had these prescribed to them by a provider. As Mary elaborated on, the opioid crisis causes much destruction to many individuals, families, and communities. Those who are addicted are seeking relief from pain and serious need. The Good Samaritan laws are just one piece of attempting to mitigate this affront to human dignity and manage the damaging effects. The bioethical principles that support the three main facets of the Good Samaritan law in regards to the opioid crisis include immunity, the 911 laws, and the naloxone access law. In regards to immunity, the Good Samaritan laws enacted throughout all 50 states are ordered to the protection of those giving care against any later litigation. This was gone into more depth by Josh in the first lecture. Even though these laws are in place to protect, research still shows a severe lack of response of individuals, even those who are highly trained to provide care. In a 1998 study of intensivists who may encounter medical emergencies within various settings, 69% said they would definitely help a man clutching his chest at a restaurant, but only 2% would respond if they tripped over an unconscious and disheveled man on a sidewalk. This is a disappointing statistic, even with Good Samaritan laws in place. The basis of the Good Samaritan law is the principle of non-necessary or non-malfeasance. It is primary to bioethics and appears to be the basis for Good Samaritan laws. These laws protect the provider of care from litigation and yet at the same time protects the victim of an emergency from gross and negligent acts, at least for most states. Most Good Samaritan laws are ordered to granting immunity to those providing care, but only 2 states require bystanders to provide this care. Vermont and Minnesota make it a crime to fail to assist someone who is in an emergency situation. These 2 states have enacted into law both the non-maleficence and beneficent principles of the bioethics. Nebraska, on the other end of the spectrum, has extremely broad Good Samaritan laws which appear to grant immunity even if actions are grossly negligent and do cause harm. In the embodiment of the principle of beneficence, into the Good Samaritan laws in Minnesota and Vermont, this makes the offering of assistance a legally mandatory obligation. The principle of beneficence in relation to the common good is a difficult mark to hit. Who decides how much assistance should be offered and for how long? In responding to an opioid overdose, does this mean a layperson must continue to give care after the administration of Narcan with cardiopulmonary support if necessary? Questions like these could become an issue for states believing that the common good can be codified by beneficence, a maximum standard rather than non-maleficence, a minimum standard of not causing harm. This legal compulsion to provide aid in Minnesota and Vermont is contrary to the free gift of self that Josh had cited earlier to be the basis of the Good Samaritan laws. In order to protect bystanders from entering a potentially harmful circumstance, no compulsion should be present in the Good Samaritan laws. Nebraska, on the other hand, in providing such a broad immunity, do cause the victims of emergency to be vulnerable to abuses due to gross negligence on part of the provider. This may be an instance where a state statute is failing to protect against harm that may occur to one party and falling short in settling a non-maleficent standard. Wasson and Cook discussed this, the principle of the common harm versus the common good in deciding what should be pursued according to state or bioethical and state policy, and it would be the argument that the Good Samaritan laws pursue the common harm principle, which is a minimum standard which can be hit, rather than the common good standard, such as Minnesota and Vermont seem to have pursued. The 911 laws. These laws are an offshoot of the immunity laws as described previously. These laws provide immunity from criminal prosecution for drug possession to overdose victims and those who seek medical aid. Oftentimes those who experience an overdose and the bystanders there who wish to call are the ones also who provided the means for their friend or the overdose victim in order to overdose. So for instance, they would be vulnerable to legal prosecution due to the sort of substances they sell or have possession of in the case of an opioid overdose. These laws, these 911 laws of the Good Samaritan laws, are in place to relieve this fear of prosecution. It is an attempt to increase freely expressed respect for human life so that another may give care in the instance of an emergency. However, these laws do not provide for complete immunity. In a study in Baltimore, 30% of those surveyed who were present to an overdose cited fear of police arrests prevented them from seeking help. However, the research shows that police arrests do not match the fears. In another recent study, 16% of police officers knew of the existence of a state's Good Samaritan law, but even with that low number of awareness, of which 97% were present at an overdose, only 1% of all surveyed law enforcement stated that they had made an arrest of either the victim or of the bystander. So the fear clearly outweighs the reality. However, with the increase of officers knowing about the Good Samaritan law, this could potentially reduce the amount of fear that people have in calling officer or calling in help for their friend who has overdosed. So therefore, funding for the distribution of knowledge regarding the Good Samaritan laws should be included within the law itself. This is a necessary step in order to relieve fears of prosecution and hopefully save more lives. This includes providing more funding to increase the benefit of the Good Samaritan laws. And the main bioethical issue with this isn't just the funding for the promulgation of information, but also the idea that perhaps these laws obstruct justice, and that this may not be morally illicit to allow someone who has broken the law to receive reduced penalties or no penalties at all just because they've called for help. This would not be the case because under the order of natural law, the respect for the dignity of the human life far outweighs political order and the political laws that are in place. The third and final facet of the Good Samaritan laws in response to the opioid crisis is the naloxone access law. As Mary described previously, Narcan is becoming an over-the-counter drug for most states. For the most part, Narcan, as a response to the opioid crisis, is affecting pharmacies, with 46 states now offering it over the counter. This begs the question as to if this method of distribution will increase the respect for the dignity of the human person, or if it will detract from it. As Mary and Josh stated earlier, this is not the case, and it does not result in people going for joyrides with a safety net of Narcan being present. However, there are those who would advocate for that, which brings up the topic of safe injection sites, which are places where those who wish to overdose would present themselves. They bring the drug in themselves, but are provided with clean needles, alcohol swabs, a safe way, in quotation marks, a safe way to overdose themselves, with staff members being present to reverse the effects of the opioid in the case that it may have caused a complete overdose rather than just a high. This is extremely morally problematic. For the most part, naloxone access seeks to save lives in response to opioid crisis, but this is actually going a step farther in the providing of needles, providing of a safe place, specifically for the intent that they will overdose or potentially overdose. This is direct cooperation with evil, and would be termed proximal, immediate, and formal or material depending upon their intention. Cooperation with evil. This is based upon the harm reduction idea that they can reduce HIV, Hep C, and other bloodborne pathogens by providing clean needles. However, even though they are providing clean needles, they are still cooperating with evil. As Pope Paul VI stated, sometimes it is lawful to tolerate a lesser moral evil in order to avoid a greater evil, or in order to promote a greater good. It is never lawful, even for the gravest reasons, to do evil that good may come of it. These safe injection sites actually have it backwards. They are promulgating a greater moral evil in order to to mitigate the lesser moral evil rather than tolerating the lesser moral evil in order to avoid the greater evil, as Pope Paul VI stated. He stated this in Humanae Vitae number 14. This cooperation with evil is never morally licit, and actually is not as popular or desired as some may think either. In a 2016 BBC interview, Dr. Neil McKegney of the University of Glasgow declared that of the 1,200 drug users he surveyed, less than 5% wanted safe injection sites. The vast majority said they wanted help for one thing, which is to get off drugs. Dr. McKegney noted these safe injection sites as a harm reduction method, in fact, enables rather than reduces. These safe injection sites are never morally licit. In conclusion, of these three main facets, bioethical facets of the Good Samaritan Law in response to the opioid crisis, immunity, the 911 laws, and the naloxone access laws, most are morally licit. There are some suggestions of remediation, such as increased awareness being written into the laws, setting a common standard, a common minimum according to the federal law, but allowing states to build upon that individually if they need to, if they find that necessary, and then never allowing safe injection sites to be put into law or promulgated, as this would enable the drug users to continue this unfortunate and deprecating habit. Thank you for watching my presentation, and hopefully I have become a little bit more aware of Good Samaritan laws and the response to the opioid crisis. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your